Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Louisville Central Community Center's Town Hall, Advancing Equity Through Early Childhood Development. Thank you all for being here this evening. We thank our panelists and we thank you, the participants, for this very important discussion this evening. We're going to hear a lot about how the early childhood delivery system is broken and how African Americans are woefully underrepresented in many of the power systems that address early childhood development. Some of the topics that we'll talk about tonight include addressing disparities in infant mortality, developing resilience in young, fragile children in current times, equitable access to quality healthcare and early child development services, breaking the cycle of generational poverty, and much more. There's a star-studded panel lined up this evening, and we'll get to that in just a moment. First, we want to acknowledge those who help programs like this become great. Our presenting sponsor is PNC Grow Up Great, and we want to acknowledge the partnership that LCCC has with the Louisville branch NAACP and other partners. I'm Renee Shaw. I'm a director of public affairs at Kentucky Educational Television and moderator of many programs there, and I'm happy to be the host of this event tonight. A couple of housekeeping notes to make note of before we throw things over to Raul Cunningham, who introduced our keynote speaker. We would like you in the audience to refer your questions or comments in the chat function. So really that's for comments or suggestions. For comments or suggestions, please use the chat function. We would prefer you to use the Q&A function during speaker presentations to submit your questions. That way we can make sure we get to those and have those answered accordingly. So once again, if you just have a comment or suggestion, use the chat function. But for questions about speaker presentations and what you'd like to see us ask, please use the Q&A function. We'll also have several polls throughout the evening just to gauge your interest in this issue and the challenges that are before it. Poll number 1 will measure the audience's roles in community or family settings. And please, if you would bring up that poll at this time, we will show the audience members what that looks like. It will ask questions about demographics, such as race and gender, and also questions about technology access. We tonight are taking advantage of technology in a way that can bring us together from all corners of the state and in Louisville. And so we know that we rely even more so on technology, but how can it be used in a healthcare setting? And so here's the question that's before you. Audience profile. What is your role in the community as it relates to this issue? It's multiple choice. I think you can probably click all that apply, but certainly the priority. And then if you scroll on down, you'll see there's a question about gender, race, age, and do you have access to internet and technology equipment such as a computer, laptop, tablet, etc. Internet only, internet and technology equipment only. So we'll give you just a few moments to answer those questions before we proceed with our keynote address. All right, we thank you for giving us that information as we set off tonight's discussion. And we start off with an engaging conversation that will be moderated by Mr. Raul Cunningham, who needs no introduction, president of the Louisville branch of the NAACP. And I will turn the program over to him. Good evening, sir. And please unmute Mr. Cunningham. Floor is yours,
Thank you,
sir.
Renee. Our keynote speaker for the evening is Dr. Jacqueline Duguay. Dr. Duguay received her MD degree and her undergraduate degree from Rutgers University. She is and holds a Master's of Public Administration. She is a fellow in the American Academy of Pediatrics. She is an author and a well-respected author and pediatrician. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jacqueline Duguay.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen so I can start the presentation. So I hope that can you all see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So thank you, everyone. And I am so honored to be here with you this evening to talk about such an important topic, advancing equity through early childhood development. I have this picture here because as I was creating the talk for this evening, the thing that kept going through my head was, how are we planting seeds, right? And what is the soil that we're planting the seeds for our children to grow and thrive? Some key points I want to cover today are talking about adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress on children. And for me, that really has to do with the soil, right? The environment that our kids are growing up in. How do we mitigate the effects of toxic stress on children? And discussing why it is so important to invest in early childhood. So in preparing for this presentation, again, I spoke with your CEO, Mr. Fields, Kevin Fields, about really what is the theme and what is really the foundation of this conversation. And he shared with me Frederick Douglass's famous quote: "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." So what we're really about is, how do we create structures and systems and the scaffolding so that we can build strong children? And first, we need to talk about those factors that impact how our children, the barriers to children growing up and developing and to be strong. So let's talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. So I have two screens, so I apologize for my technical issues. All right, so adverse childhood experiences are those experiences that occur in childhood that pose a serious threat to both the physical and psychological well-being of children. So I look at it as three buckets: what's happening at home, what's happening in our communities, and what's the effect on our health. Data have shown that the more adverse childhood experiences that a person has starting in childhood, the greater the impact on health outcomes. And the impact is ultimately can potentially be poor health outcomes. So on the next slide, I want to share a slide from George Washington University's Resilient Communities. And they created a framework talking about the pair of ACEs. In my world of pediatrics, we customarily talk about adverse childhood experiences. Examples of those experiences include maternal depression, emotional sexual abuse, substance use, homelessness, divorce. But there are also adverse community environments that also impact our children. So ACEs in childhood and in our communities, right, really impact, both of these ACEs impact how our children grow and develop. And as you can see, some of the examples of adverse community environments include poverty, discrimination, and I would even add racism and structural racism, community disruption, lack of opportunity, economic mobility and social capital, poor housing, quality and affordability, and violence. And for many in the African-American community, structural racism really is at the root of many of these adverse community environments. So I want to transition to the conversation about toxic stress. So as kids experience adverse childhood experiences such as racism, or community violence, if they don't have the support of a trusted adult that can buffer the impacts of these factors and experiences, then there is a wear and tear on the body and the immune system and the developing brain of the child. And this figure from What Are ACEs from the Developing Child at Harvard University likens it to, just imagine if you kept your car running, okay, for several days or weeks, all right? When you eventually wanted to use that car, it wouldn't start. So the same sort of analogy, you know, in terms of kids, just imagine unremitting trauma and stress on a child that's not buffered. That can wear down an individual. So to sort of illustrate this point a little bit more, I wanted to talk about the bear in the forest. So this is from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, her allegory about the impact of stress on children. So Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris sets the stage of, imagine if you were in a forest and you saw a bear, okay? Your brain will immediately determine, do I need to run? Do I need to fight this bear? Okay, so our brain is sending signals to our adrenal glands, which then will release stress hormones such as cortisol. And so as you can imagine, your heart is starting to pound, your pupils are dilating, your airways are opening, right? Because you're getting ready, right, to do what you need to do. But the problem, so you can make a decision, you can make a quick decision, but imagine if the bear was in your house every single day, was in your neighborhood every single day. Your system would always be on the ready to fight, to flight, or to freeze. And over time, all right, our body starts to adapt to the environment and the circumstances that we're around. And as our bodies become adaptive, we can also develop maladaptive or health damaging ways to deal with this stress. And we know that children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are developing. So high doses of adversity not only affect the brain structure and function, they also can impact the developing immune system, the developing hormone systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So this is how we can have effects that not only impact our children when they're born, but also before they're born. Because can you imagine the mother, the father, the parents, the guardians of these children growing up maybe in a cyclical way where they have the same experiences that have caused adversity. That can turn on and turn off genes that are both protective or predisposed to chronic diseases. So toxic stress, I referred to that before. We all experience stress, right? There's either positive or we can have tolerable stress. You know, when we have positive stress, our bodies are going to increase our heart rate. We're going to have mild elevations in stress hormones. We're going to get married. We're going to being asked to the prom. You know, we're going to do well on our test. Tolerable stress, though, maybe a little bit more serious. You have some temporary stress responses, but they're buffered by supportive relationships. But again, when we talk about toxic stress, we're talking about prolonged activation of stress response systems without protective relationships. So I wanted to share a few data slides. And these data slides are from Louisville, Kentucky. And these disparities that I'm going to talk about are manifestations of the effects of ACEs, both adverse environments as well as experiences. So we look at the kindergarten readiness in Kentucky. Over time, there's been improvement in kindergarten readiness. There's been slight increases among Hispanic and Black students. And there also have been noted decreases among Asian and white students, but there's still disparities that exist both in Kentucky, across the state, as well as the Louisville area. The next slide shows poverty, children under 5 and poverty by race. And again, we see disparities. We see higher rates of poverty in Black children, both in Louisville, compared to white children under 5. And then the next slide about underweight births, low weight birth rates in children by race. And again, we're seeing these constant disparities. In my world of pediatrics and in public health, because I have been a public health official as well, you know, we usually talk about race as a risk factor for these health disparities and health inequities. But what I'm trying to do is build a case. What is the soil that our children are growing up in? What are those experiences and the environments that many of our children are growing up in that predispose to these health disparities, these long-term health consequences and differences amongst groups of people, not based on race, but based on other factors? So there's a link between trauma, equity, and resilience. Across the country, families and communities face challenges of achieving and maintaining good health in the face of adversity. And childhood adversity, such as abuse and neglect, parental substance abuse and incarceration, are also at times rooted in community environments that lack equity. These inequitable conditions provide little access to support or buffers that support resilience. But we want to change that narrative so that we can change this linkage where we actually address equity through resilience by decreasing trauma, the impact of trauma on our children. So let's talk about how do we prevent and address toxic stress, the opportunities that we have. So this is a quote from Dr. Jack Shonkoff from Harvard University. And he says that resilience depends on supportive, responsive relationships and mastering a set of capabilities that can help us respond and adapt to adversity in healthy ways. It's those capacities and relationships that can turn toxic stress into tolerable stress. So we talk about resilience. So resilience is an important and almost one of the single most common factors for children who develop resilience, is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. These relationships provide the personalized responsiveness and scaffolding and protection that buffer children from developmental disruption. These supportive relationships provide adaptive skill building for children and positive experiences. And as you can see from the scale, the more positive experiences a child has, the more resilience that they have. So there are some predisposing factors for positive childhood outcomes. And we touched on them a little bit in the previous slide. Supportive adult-child relationships, building a sense of self-efficacy and perceived control, providing opportunities to strengthen adaptive skills and self-regulatory capacities, and mobilizing sources of faith, culture, and tradition, and hope. So now I want to pivot to discussions of what are the benefits of investing in early childhood? And I use the context of childcare in reference to our talk today, centering Louisville's Central Community Center. And this is a quote from Lauren Birchfield Kennedy. She says, for families, access to childcare has always been a fundamental economic driver. It promotes employment stability, financial security, and an opportunity for economic mobility. In turn, financial security promotes the other protective pillars that uphold and uplift health and well-being, housing, nutrition, social connectivity, access to physical and mental health services, and the list goes on. So I wanted to focus on this piece as well, because when we talk about those protective factors for kids that buffer them against the adverse childhood experiences and environments that many of our children are growing in, for many very young, childcare provides that essential resource and therefore becomes a key social determinant of health. Those kids who have access to quality childcare and perhaps even childcare sites that provide more connected services within the community have even a stronger opportunity to build strong children. So, and some, to kind of sum up that point, early education programs help build resilient children. So why do we invest in early childhood? Because we know the impact of the environment and conditions at home and experiences that can lead to problems with child development, increased risk of chronic illnesses, inclusive of depression, diabetes, substance use, and poor educational outcomes. So the soil that we want to toil and we want to make fertile, we liken that to how do we create those environments, which is the soil that our children will live and thrive and grow. So we want to make investments early in childhood, one, for brain development and for social emotional development. Because we know that when we build resilient children, they're more apt to have protective factors and have better outcomes. So the benefits of providing these supports for children early, and we have the context of early childcare, early learning environments, and supporting of parents, is that we have improved educational outcomes. We have higher earnings for those children and families, and then also improved health outcomes. And lastly, I just wanted to reference this community framework as an opportunity and as a model for how we can break multi-generational chains of the impact of adversity for children. And this model, this building community resilience approach, the BCR model, looks at 4 different areas. They look at a shared understanding of the importance and impact of ACEs and races and resilience. They look at readiness. They take into account how can cross-sector partnerships work to contribute to improving the outcomes of children. And they also look at the community within itself. What are those linkages? Who is a leader to help make a difference for children? So in summary, our key takeaways are adverse childhood experiences in communities lead to poor outcomes for children's development and health outcomes. By taking a resilience approach, it's a way to buffer the negative effects of ACEs. Investing in early childhood provides benefits of improved brain and social development, improved health outcomes. In building community resilience, we foster equity through policy, practice, and program change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Duguay. I have a couple of questions that we would like to pose to you. Has your research been beneficial to policymakers and other stakeholders?
I'm going to say yes. The policy statement that I helped co-write with my co-authors, Dr. Maria Trent and Dr. Daniel Dooley, has been viewed over 200,000 times. and has been cited in many articles and used as the basis for making policy and recommendation changes. So I would say definitely yes.
Thank you. How does racism affect access to necessary services such as education and healthcare?
So, based on the research that we did for the policy statement, we found that structural racism really is at the root of policy development. And when you think about who's at the table to make the decisions, and why they make the decisions, and for what financial gain, and if the community is not involved, that also has an impact. So racism can play a role, and has historically played a role in education as well as healthcare policy.
What recommendations do you offer to African American community leaders?
So I think that's an amazing question. I think a couple things I would recommend. Definitely working with your constituents. All right, who are the key stakeholders within the community to get their voice? Because for so long, when we don't center the voices of our constituents, our clients, our customers, consumers, our friends and neighbors, then we have a one-sided view of how to make things different, how to make change. And if the change is going to affect the people that we need to participate, it's important, I think, that they participate. And I think the other factor as well is that to not give up hope, because progress has been made and progress will continue to be made, though slow. But I think it's important to maintain that hope, and also kind of look back on history and be informed on how we can do things better for children.
Thank you so very, very much. And at this point, I will turn it back over to our moderator, Renee Shaw. Renee.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, and thank you, Dr. Duguay. I took copious notes on your presentation, as early childhood or advanced childhood experiences is something that we've talked about a lot on my network, Kentucky Educational Television. And it's good to have some of those messages reinforced about the impact of toxic stress over and over again on brain development and hormonal advancements or stunting of that. And I thank you for giving such an eloquent presentation on that and the importance of early childhood experiences, particularly high quality early learning experiences that we know make such a major difference. So thank you very much for that very engaging presentation. At this point, we want to segue now into our next panel about leadership from someone who knows what it takes to be a good leader, and that's Mr. Al Cornish, who has an impressive background and experience and resume and learning and organization and development with healthcare settings, and he is also a current board member at the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence. I will turn things over to him now to introduce our next set of panelists.
Thank you, Renee. And I'm really honored this evening to participate in this discussion and also to moderate this particular panel. We have a very diverse panel and of real experts in the area that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about leadership and what it requires to support the efforts that we're talking about this evening. I'd like to introduce our 5 panelists, starting with Senator Gerald Neal. And he is our senator from Kentucky District 33. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Anna Smith, and she's the chair of the LCCC Board of Directors.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
Yes, indeed. And Dr. Kish Kumi Price, and she's the Senior Policy and Advocacy Director for Kentucky Youth Advocates.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Glad to be here.
and Harry Hayes, who's an executive with Anthem. Good evening, Harry. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? All
We
right,
can.
good, thanks. It's glad to be part of the panel.
Good. And last but not least, Kevin Fields, who's the president and CEO of the Louisville Central Community Centers Incorporated. Welcome, Kevin. We're glad to have you all. I'm going to start off by giving you each about 2 minutes to talk a little bit more about your background and how it relates to the discussion we're going to have this evening. And let me help to frame it a little bit with you as you think about your brief introductions. One of the things that we find is only about half of Kentucky's 5-year-olds register as prepared for kindergarten on the Brigance screener. Kindergarten readiness rates persistently lower among Black, English language learners, Latinos, and for children from low socioeconomic status families. So I want you to think about that as you talk a little bit about your introductions. We'll start with Senator Neal.
Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate that. Of course, serving in the Kentucky General Assembly for a number of years, part of my responsibility from time to time, in fact, chaired the Health and Welfare Committee at one point, but also dealt with and served on the Appropriation Revenue Committee. And our responsibility is all related to policy. And the fact of the matter is that policy from where we function drives everything. So the question is what are the priorities that are set with respect to the issues that have priority as it relates to policy? Well, obviously, when we start talking about the education of our children, we talk about the health and welfare of our children, then we obviously are talking about what happens to them from birth, in fact, in prenatal, all the way through that process. So the question is, what kinds of resources, what type of options are made available to shore up those things that the doctor referred to, the deficiencies that we have in our society abound. So from our standpoint, when we deal with questions of early childhood development, that is a very serious and ongoing discussion. When we're talking about kindergarten, we're talking about all schools having kindergarten. If we're talking about actually preschool, even before kindergarten, those are policy questions that obviously have to be funded to deal with that. So this is sort of a superficial examination of that, because it's more comprehensive, because when we deal with policy considerations, these things are interrelated and interconnected. And it's a very in-depth discussion. So I appreciated the presentation that we just heard, because it really logically connects all those things that end up to challenges for young people, and how that manifests itself, in fact, throughout their lives, and how that affects other areas that we have to address from a policy standpoint.
Good. Thank you, Senator. Dr. Smith?
Yes, having a strong background in healthcare and administration, I would look at this particular question from a healthcare point of view to support education. I think it's difficult to focus on childhood development if you are dealing with childhood diseases and illnesses, such as we know asthma is very prevalent in African-American communities for children, sickle cell anemia, which we don't really seem to talk a whole lot about, but we have still a lot of our African-American community that is affected by sickle cell anemia. We do have some policies in place to help with coverage, maybe healthcare coverage, but again, a lot of it is maybe not accessed and utilized because it's not known about. Diabetes, still very prevalent, maternal health care, and most of my healthcare practice has been in the inner city hospitals and facilities. So I've seen firsthand the effect that the lack of appropriate healthcare and being able to support families who have children who are ill and affected by either chronic or acute situations. I've seen firsthand how not being able to really focus on that or help the family entities focus on that can affect the choices that they make in terms of education. If I have a child who's in the hospital and I'm trying to make sure they're well enough to even, be able to survive for the next, portion of their life, I may not focus so much on the development of their getting them ready for pre-K or for kindergarten. So I think we have to look at it not only in policy programs, but also making sure that our healthcare practices support our educational needs. And that's how I would come at that.
All right, thank you. Dr. Price?
Yes, thank you. So my start in this work was as a school counselor, and I was located in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the school was 97% free and reduced lunch and about 99% Black students. And it was very obvious when students came in, which students were prepared and which students were not, which students we were going to have to put more supports around, not just the student, but also the family. And I think one of the major things that really got under my skin was that it was also obvious that those families didn't have the supports that they needed and were doing the best that they could with what they had, but they were also getting judged as soon as their child walked through the door in a negative way, meaning that they were labeled as not successful. Teachers treated students differently, and I saw that day in and day out based on where those students came from or how they behaved in the classroom. Students acting out, calling teachers out of their names as kindergartners, and teachers taking that personally instead of realizing that that was a norm that that child had been introduced to, and using screening tools like the Brigance that we use today is really one of those items that is a teaching to the test. So if you are in a quality child care center, you're going to get prepared for that Brigance test. And if you don't have access to that, then you're not going to be prepared. And so I just, throughout my time in education, I have continued to go further upstream, which is why I'm in the space that I'm in today around advocacy and policy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hayes.
Yes, just to kind of follow up on what Dr. Smith was saying in terms of being in healthcare and really trying to figure out how we can move the needle. I've worked in corporate America for over 25 years, and I will say the last 2 or 3 years, it's been the most aggressive I've seen in terms of talking about social issues. And that's great, because one thing corporate America can bring to the table is really support financially to do the programs that need to be done. Now, it's not the be all end all, but it's definitely a start. And I think the role of Anthem is really to listen, learn, and to really allyship with organizations like Louisville Central Community Centers and others who really have boots on the ground, are trying to take the issues that plague our communities and make a difference and being able to help. We want to, advance healthcare, and that is making sure some of the things that Dr. Smith mentioned are being treated, and also making sure there's access to healthcare, which is critical. So I think in order for us to be successful, we have to move together as a team and really create some synergies around what needs to happen, how it needs to happen. And that's the reason I'm happy to be part of this panel and this discussion, because I think this is where it starts, is making awareness to the issues and then figuring out a way to move forward from there.
Good, thank you. Kevin?
Thank you, Al, and thank you to this panel. I'm pleased to be a part of this distinguished panel and pleased to talk about this issue of early child development from a leadership perspective. You know, I'm wearing a few hats here. One, certainly a CEO of Louisville Central Community Center, but also want to represent one of our program areas, the University Child Development Center. That's been a flagship of ours for several decades, providing quality care in the midst of poverty. And I can tell you, it is indeed a challenge, and we work hard to sustain this idea of quality. And so certainly talking about this issue of early child development from a perspective of being a provider, but also want to represent the perspective of public policy leadership, you know, having a background in public policy and understanding the significance role that public policy plays. And I'm so pleased to be closely associated with Senator Gerald Neal and really recognize him for his great leadership in being a policymaker here in Kentucky on behalf of West Louisville. And it's so important because, you know, many of the issues that our keynote speaker talked about are systemic in nature. And when we talk about, you know, underrepresentation, when we talk about, you know, how do we mobilize resources to address this issue, a lot of that starts in the legislative process. And I can tell you just from the provider perspective, the public policies that currently exist in Kentucky are inadequate to provide the kind of quality care for any community, and especially so for the economically distressed African-American community in Louisville. And we know that just having struggled with that policy for years. So I think we have an opportunity now while we are in a period of public investment, public windfall investment coming off of a pandemic, but also putting us in a position to rethink, recalibrate our policies and make real strategic investments that are necessary to create a different outcome. When I hear Dr. Kumi Price talk about that experience of, you know, working it with children at an early age and understanding that, you know, these children are presented to public education system at kindergarten, and the whole idea is they need to be ready. Well, often they're not ready. And that's a function of a lot of issues that we have not addressed. The immediate default is we want to say, well, the parents need to do a better job of getting their kids ready for school. And well, yeah, true enough. But what supports do parents have? And the supports that they have are inadequate. So I'm just saying that we've got some work to do from a public policy perspective. First of all, the funding mechanism for sustainable quality care needs to be addressed. Secondly, the representation, who's making the decisions. And I love the way that our keynote addressed that. It is important who's at the table, why they're at the table, and what kind of economic imperative are they driving? Because at the end of the day, when we talk about public policy, we're talking about economics and access to resources, and who's driving that conversation is very important. So for a lot of these reasons, this is a very perplexing issue for us as a provider, but we're in it to win the idea that we need to transform this system, and that's why we're here.
I think one of the things that our participants can see is that we have a very diverse panel, and they have all come at this issue from a different perspective. And my question is around this whole concept of having Black professionals in leadership roles in health, education, and child development. What can you suggest that our participants and others that are listening can do to become more involved and to assume a leadership role? And I'll let any panelists who'd like to respond.
If I may, let me, you need only look at the studies and you begin to understand how diversity in the leadership position is so important. For instance, there's a studies compiled in 2019 by the American College of Healthcare Executives suggests diversity in healthcare leadership can enhance quality of care, quality of life in the workplace, community relations, and the ability to affect community health status. Now that's powerful if you think about that. They're saying that this particular configuration of individuals that are involved can have a very positive and constructive impact. But you go on, in 2018, the Brookings Institute reported that administrators of color bring a number of unique strengths and more frequent exposure to people of color in authoritative positions can replace stereotyping and unconscious biases with acceptance and trust. And that's very important, because if you don't have that dynamic in the framework of leadership, then those are not things that rise to priority. Those are things that don't get worked on or brought to within focus. Those are the things that do not receive the resources that are necessary to address the problems that you're observing. So it's important for those in leadership, for that leadership to be diverse, and for those folks that are not only sensitive to that issue, but those individuals that actually can educate and promote and help prioritize these considerations.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll say it's very important. You know, an organization should be a representation of the community they serve. And every day, some employees leave work and go home to areas of the city that are often underserved and underfunded. And since those are historically marginalized communities, predominantly minorities, it's going to take someone from those communities to give voice to the challenges. And people are more receptive to a message from people who look like them and have similar experiences. So I think that's an area where Black professionals in leadership can take an active role in the area of health and education and childhood development, where we really need to make sure that we are doing the best we can to put our resources there.
I think Harry kind of touched on my next question, and that is, how does corporate America and society in general adequately support the minority community when there is noticeable disappropriate representation of minorities in positions of leadership and influence? What can they do?
I would say listen. They can listen to the people who are present and speaking up on behalf of Black and Brown communities. I think that the question you asked before about, is it important? It absolutely is important, but it's not important at all if you're in the room and not saying anything, or you are saying all the things and not being listened to, right? Or tolerated. Yeah. So I think if the question is, what can the corporate sector do? It's, they can listen, and they can also realize that having one voice at the table that represents a host of people is not enough. You need more representation. You need more people at the table. You need to get out of the room and go to the community. And so that would be my recommendation.
Yes.
And if I could piggyback.
Go right ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, and I'll take that question from the perspective of society in general. Certainly corporate America has a responsibility, but society in general needs to also understand too that, we've been zeroed in on this issue for a while. And, we are concerned about a lot of issues. We, as society, we're concerned about a lot of issues. We recognize the fact that our nation is in crisis on a lot of fronts. We've got homelessness, we've got high rates of crime, we've got a workforce shortage issue that's out of control. There's many fronts at home and abroad that are of concern. But society in general needs to understand at this juncture in our history that we need to be taking a long-range perspective on how we address all of these concerns. The day of putting a Band-Aid on a crisis needs to be over. And that means we've got to start from a foundational perspective to right some past transgressions, some past failures. And the failure of investing in early development, early human development needs to be recognized for what it is. And so if a child is showing up not ready for kindergarten at age 5, we have failed society. And because that child is going to be faced with a lifelong experience of challenge, and too many fall by the wayside. We see that statistically on a lot of fronts with too many high school dropouts, too much underachievement, high unemployment, high crime. All of that goes back to our failure of investing adequately at that foundational level. So that is a reckoning that society needs to come to grips with. And certainly policymakers need to come to grips with. But the idea has got to be, let's think about future generations. We can't go back and put a Band-Aid and fix every problem that's out there now, but we can start a new trend for what the future might end up, because if we fail to do that, everything that we're concerned about today will be a problem to the nth degree in the future. So I think we need to come to reckon on and recognize that.
Well, that's a great segue to my next question, which is, I think the forum tonight is excellent. But what suggestions do you have kind of going forward to promoting greater awareness of this issue? What can be done? Senator?
Al, you look at the landscape. There are some studies and evaluations that reflect that even though we have 12.5% of the US population is Black, yet only 3.2% senior leadership positions are held by Black people, and that 18.3% of the US population is Hispanic, and yet only 4% of company executives are Hispanic. So that tells you right there, when you're talking about corporate America, that tells you that from that leadership perspective, we've got a lot of work to do. So the question here, though, is that how do you achieve diversity in these situations? And I think you got to have diversity in leadership because it requires commitment at all professional levels. So when you're talking about those folks that have the responsibility of running corporations, particularly as they affect whatever it is that their primary objectives are, they have to recognize that these things are all interrelated and interconnected, and they have a responsibility, as Kevin has pointed out here as well. So the question is, do they or will they assume that as a priority within their own policy-making structures? And that takes leadership from the very top to get that done. Inclusive leadership development, mentoring, and sponsorship of diverse staff for challenging leadership assignments that enhance career trajectories adds to that. In other words, it has to be intentional. It can't be something that someone just says this is a good idea. They have to be challenged on this front. And I think these kinds of discussions we're having here today have to get outside of that, and they have to go into the boardrooms so that we can actually challenge those individuals that make those decisions that can bring about the outcomes we're talking about here today.
Thank you. That was
Al, as it relates to minorities and leadership, I think it's a two-pronged approach. First, it's consciously looking for opportunities to promote minorities. For so long, the higher you go in the organization, the few minorities you see. And I think it's an unconscious bias. People often hire people who think like them, act like them, and oftentimes they look like them. And if you have minorities in key roles, it's hard to bridge that gap. And then I think the second part is the companies have to look at how they're recruiting new associates. I know at Anthem, we're more intentional about increasing our diversity in candidate slates and our hiring practices. Businesses and corporations across the country have to focus on where they're recruiting, how they're recruiting, and what they're doing to foster inclusion and training implicit bias. Those things have to happen in order to really change the culture.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add to that, those who have been successful in being, promoted upward, have upward mobility within the African American community, be that here in Louisville or just, in a national way, that they need to also help mentor and bring along those behind them. We can't just always look at the corporation. I mean, they need to do this, they need to do that. We also need to make sure that we're investing in those who are right behind us, all the way down to those who are just now coming into the world, like the little guy we saw yesterday, little Melissa's baby. And also that, we look at our screen and we can see a number of very young people that are working at the LCCC. We have a lot of wonderful, talented people. And so we have to make sure we focus on them and give them the avenue and the wings to fly and support them. And we need to be involved at the community level, not just at the corporate level.
And if I could just jump in with one other added point, Black economic empowerment is very important. And certainly we need more positions filled with Black people, but those positions need to be positions of influence around economic power. And that's critically important. So adding someone to your team just to keep them in a subordinate role to co-sign on what you're doing. And so this message is really to the powers structures that be that have had economic control on every front since the beginning of time. It is time to release the harness on some of that economic power. Certainly that can be legislated through policy, but also it can be regulated through corporate leadership. And it needs to be done. We need to really, if we're going to fix issues in the Black community, it needs to be fixed by Black leaders who have control of purse strings that can be strategic in how they execute and can really make sustainable change that we can, understand and we can implement. So that's not to say other folk can't deal with it, but more of the same is going to get us the same of what we've been getting. And I think at this point, we're tired of that. We really want to say, move over, give up the control of the purse strings. And I don't mean that just to sound greedy for money. I'm talking about influence and being able to control our destiny to solve our own problems. And that's really important.
Yes. So let's say that we get the right leadership in place, they make the right policy decisions. What would you say are the things that we should use as measurements of success?
Well, I'm going to jump out there.
Thank you.
Let me say to you this. That question requires a lot of evaluation. It's not something that you come off the top of your head, but minimum goals should be set, evaluated, and raised to the highest level of priorities. I keep saying this thing about priorities, and that should be done in the corporate boardrooms, holding the executives accountable. In other words, there has to be a policy within these things. They have to be measurable. So there must be some framework with respect to that. But there also, something Kevin said earlier, this can't be something that's just thrown out there as a great idea. As I've said earlier, there should be a strategic approach showing the benefit. If you don't show the benefit, no one's going to embrace your idea, particularly in that kind of framework. But they ought to recognize this is a rapidly changing demographic, and they should respond to that, and it should be tailored at least to their particular industry. And then corporate America at all levels should be solicited as partners in this endeavors. They're partners in this endeavors to expand the reach and the validity of such an initiative. So I keep getting back to this thing of priority. And we can talk and others can talk, and that's fine. But they have to be challenged. You have to be confronted with it, and they have to be put on the table. We have to be persistent, and I think we must be insistent with respect to that. And I think there's signs of it. I'm hearing this from Mr. Hayes. in terms of Anthem. He's telling us that they are talking about these things and they're intentional. Now, the question is, how intentional? How far are they going to go? How that's going to be evaluated? Hopefully, they're going to go a long way and become leaders. And they will be to demonstrate and model what good corporate players are in this particular area.
Yes.
Thanks, Senator Neal. And I think you hit on a very good point, because it all starts by creating a solid plan. You know, everything starts with a good plan. And if it's a good plan, people will get excited about it. And a good plan will always yield good results. So I think the plan has to be created, and within the plan, we have some results that we have to expect. And we have to hold somebody accountable for getting those results. And from there, if it moves, we have to measure it, document, and make adjustments. You know, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we have to have someone focus on it each and every day to make sure the plan has been executed and results are being driven. To your point, you know, I know Anthem is committed to $50 million over the next 5 years to make a difference in health disparities. And we have to have somebody to measure to make sure those things are taking place.
Yeah.
And the question might be, if I may, is $50 million enough?
Yeah.
For them to claim leadership? I'm just being rhetorical here.
Yeah.
And it's not about Anthem. It's about anyone that jumps into this space. Is that enough? So that has to be assessed as well as they move forward with respect to their commitment.
Al, I want to piggyback on what Senator Neal is saying and what Harry is saying. Your question about how do we evaluate? I think we need new models. We need innovation. And so I posed the question, what would it look like if we could address urban inner city environments where poverty is high, where all the societal ills are very prevalent, but we could have a place where children and moms and dads that are expecting children would have a place to go where they could get full services to take care of their health and their educational needs from the time that the mom is expecting to the child is born, to keeping the child and the mom healthy while the child is developing, having a place where the children can go, where parents can go back to work, and they can feel confident that the child is being educated, prepared, and being made to be ready for the world by age 5. What if we could accomplish that in one location in our nation, and then begin to figure out that this is what it could look like in communities around the country? A new paradigm for early human development is what we're advocating. And I have to say that because when Harry Hayes talks about we need to have a plan, that is the type of plan that we're advancing as we think about reimagining our Miniversity program and taking it to a new generation of service delivery where we can co-locate a continuum of care, health and education from conception to 5 in one setting, right in the midst of the poorest part of our community. For us, you want to talk about evaluation, empower us to deliver on a program that includes all of those types of elements, and we would demonstrate a new trend for early child development that can be spread around the country. And we can evaluate that, and we're going to measure it from beginning to end. So my staff would say that I'm remiss if I don't plug the work that we're doing. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with your support.
And I'm just going to add to that. We have to start somewhere. You know, we can keep saying, well, we need to do this and we need to do that. But you can, as we all know, suffer from paralysis by analysis. Okay, so at some point, we have to come together and say, here's the 1, 2, or 3 things that we're going to specifically focus on. Someone just put a question up about like a SMART goal, you know, specific, measurable, et cetera. And so, no, we're not going to be able to solve everything all in one, you know, big effort, but we have to start somewhere. Be dedicated to that, committed to that, measurable to that, and deliver on that.
Dr. Smith and the rest of the panel, this was excellent. Thank you all for all of your responses to the questions around this issue of leadership. And with the leadership of just these 5 people, I believe we're going to make tremendous progress, but it's something that we're going to have to continue to work on as a community, both corporate and the general public. So thank you all. Excellent, excellent job. I'm going to turn it back over to Renee.
Thank you, Al, and I couldn't agree more. Thank all the panelists. That was indeed an expert panel in so many ways, and we appreciate their perspective and their insight and their passion on this issue. So many good points made about the investment that we should be making in early childhood development and who should be held accountable to ensure that it comes to fruition. So job well done to you, Al, and to all those who participated in that recent panel. I do want to talk to our next panel about a point that Mr. Fields was making about how there is a lack of a national policy, a national standard on early childhood and early learning and ensuring quality. He didn't quite say it that way, but I think that's a point that we should explore throughout the rest of our time together this evening. At this particular time, before we go on to our expert panel, as they are called, we want to bring up poll number 2, that measures levels of awareness and interest and concern. And you will see when it comes to public child care policy, it asks you, what is your level of awareness regarding public child care policy? And you can choose from extremely aware, somewhat aware, neutral, somewhat unaware, extremely unaware. Second question, what is your level of interest regarding public child care policy? Choose 1, extremely interested, somewhat interested, neutral. And somewhat uninterested, extremely uninterested. I don't think we'll have any of those responses in this group tonight. So I'll give you just a couple of seconds to finish that poll before we continue on with our program. All right. So now we're going to go to a group who I know will also follow the previous group with a plume. Dr. Beverly Gaines, pediatrician and president and CEO of Dr. Beverly Gaines and Associates, is joining us. Dr. Cynthia Collins, MD Family Medicine, Telehealth physician. Alexa Hughes, doula, lactation educator, and owner of Granny's Girls Birth Initiative. And Dr. Kish Kumi Price, who you just saw previously, Senior Policy and Advocacy Director for Kentucky Youth Advocates. As was done in the previous panel, I will allow each of you to give a couple of minutes in introducing yourself and your perspective that you would like to share with us this evening. And I'll begin with Dr. Beverly Gaines.
Thank you so much. And I would like to say thank you to everyone on this panel, including our host, for this opportunity. I've been serving the pediatric population in Louisville for 37 years, and I've seen so many disparities, and I've experienced so many disappointments. However, I think it's time. It's time for us to take all of the challenges into our own bailiwick and address it. To the last panel, I've worked with the esteemed Dr. Senator Gerald, Neal, Kevin Fields, but one thing I want to add is that because I've worked at all the national level, state level, and local levels, one thing I've observed is that we need parents. We need parents to get in charge of these issues, because at NIH, I was on an advisory panel with NIH, but NIH sometimes has the most money behind the more obscure diseases because of the parents. So I don't want to leave the parents out. I think corporate money is good, state money, federal money, local money is all good. But how did we make progress in the civil rights? Because we got the people involved. And so let's not overlook the parents of these children, because I'm working now with Kevin Fields, I call everybody doctor, so just excuse me. But anyway, I'm working with Kevin Fields, and we're trying to get the babies from conception on. That's where it really begins. If you're talking about brain development, you're talking about a healthy in utero experience, postnatal, not a premature experience. Black mothers are twice as likely to die during pregnancy, and sometimes 3 times. So we want to get those mothers to healthy deliveries, not prematurity, not, I have one person that works in my office that had a baby at less than a pound. The baby is doing fairly well now, but she has many struggles. So our goal should be to educate. We need the corporate support. We need state, local, national support. But we really got to drill down to these parents and say, hey, this is a national problem, and we need to have a wide approach. Because even if we have 3% in the boardrooms, we can have 13% on the ground force. And so that's my message. I have been so blessed to have worked with people like Francis Collins at NIH, the National Medical Association, at the state level with Dr. Governor Burton Jones, Senator Gerald Neal, and now here locally with Kevin Fields. I'm here, but I want everyone to say it is time. It is time for change, and we want healthier babies that'll be healthier on entrance to school and can go on to get great jobs and to get graduate degrees. That's my story.
A great story indeed, certainly. Now I'd like for Dr. Cynthia Collins to give us a few remarks.
Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Collins. I am actually a native of Louisville, Kentucky. I was born and raised here in Louisville. I left after high school to pursue my career. I recently returned at the end of 2020, so I'm excited to be a part of this awesome team and this group. The excellent, inspiring presentation by Dr. Jacqueline was totally awesome. And all the comments up till now have been very encouraging and enlightening. But I just want to mention, I'm family medicine, I'm board certified. I've been practicing for 18 years. 15 of those years, I was in the brick and mortar, seeing patients. In the last 3 years, I took on the position of working for Telehealth with MD Live. I'm currently their clinical medical director in that company. And it's interesting, when COVID hit, we were in position to handle the tsunami of calls. I mean, it was incredible, the amount of calls that came in from patients because they didn't want to be seen in the brick and mortar settings anymore. So telehealth has proven its worth. My twist today is just to educate on telehealth. It used to be a rare commodity. Not very many people knew about us. I've been working it way before COVID. And when COVID hit, we became a household name. So it's been interesting. And, telehealth is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And the studies had shown in March of 2020, the services for telehealth increased by 154%. Everyone was staying home and they wanted to be seen by someone that was touchless so they could stay safe. Because the benefits of telehealth includes we're convenient, we're quick. I can crank out a call sometimes in 5 minutes, depending on the case that's involved. Usually within 15 minutes, I've sent the medicine, I've finished my note, I've closed the account. And that's the beauty of telehealth. It's quick, it's fast, and it's efficient, and it's effective. We treat in a contagious-free, contagious avoidance environment. We lessen the use of PPEs, the protective equipment. We don't need that. And we see patients as they live life. I've seen patients in Disney World, they're getting sick. I see patients, teachers in school systems, they're on their teaching break and they call us and they're excited because we can treat them. They can be on their way to better health. It's a way to treat and to enhance the health of all ages, but specifically here for the pediatric patients. Now, telehealth also extends its services to behavioral health. That is an area that has become very, very useful as well. And I enjoyed Dr. Jacqueline talking about ACEs, where we have to observe, where we want to observe patients in their home setting. Telehealth offers that advantage of seeing them in their home setting. It reaches the underserved areas. And with MD Live, we actually do audio calls, so it takes away the bias that may occur in a racial interaction. We see patients, we're talking by phone. We can also do by video. They take and choose which way they want to be seen. Our patient satisfactions are high. But I would like to say the millennial group is where we get the most bang for our money, the 25 to 40-year-olds, and those are the childbearing ages. They know how to work the electronic system, and they can get online and take care of their kids without having to, leave work, and they can have the care and the access that they need, so they can have quality care and good access at the same time. And we can treat a broad range. Now, this does not take away from the PCP. We still need the kids to come in for the physicals. We still need ERs. We still need hospitalization services. So we are just another interim service that's available that has become very prominent with this current COVID climate.
Dr. Collins, if I can just interject that for those who thought that telehealth could be somewhat inferior, I think you've made a strong and solid case for why that's not the case. And I just want to add, for those who have technological barriers, how can they somehow overcome those, or is there assistance for those to make sure that telehealth, they can use that opportunity to an optimal level?
Well, we can receive calls by phone. You can do it by your tablet, by your laptop. So there are lots of ways to interact by telehealth. So most people have phones. I mean, everybody walks around with their cell phone. So they can call us on their cell phone. You can connect with us. So that should take away a lot of the disadvantage that's out there. So it is a service that's available and usable. And I just want to get the word out there that we are active. I actually was checking with my company today. Kentucky is we do accept Medicare and Medicaid from Kentucky. So if we are on your insurance panel, you can call us directly for healthcare. Okay. And that's pretty much it. I'll turn it back over to Renee.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. I appreciate that. Miss Alexa Hughes, I would love for you to chime in right now. You've got your shameless plug on Granny's Girls. I love it when people wear the logo that's appropriate to draw attention. You know how to do it. Floor is yours, my lady.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, you all. I'm so glad to be here. Got to thank the midwife that gave me all my decked out pins. Repping for the midwives today. But I'm a local doula here. I'm a full spectrum doula, meaning that I do practice as both a birth doula and a postpartum doula. But birthing is what I specialize in. It's what I'm certified in. And then I'm also certified as a midwife assistant for the Journey Nurse Midwives, and they have a home birth based company. And but the reason why I'm here for my nonprofit with Granny's Birth Initiative, I'm really all about taking care of our birthing people that are not accepted by society or often are not given forgiveness in order to have maternal support or easily ask for it. So I'm looking for our birthing people in our penal system, so prisons, jails, in between those systems, our teen moms that are in their foster care systems that are pregnant, and they may be either aging out and trying to keep their baby, or if they're also trying to keep their baby, we want to help them out in those situations. And we want to be a great resource and reference to our mothers that are amongst shelters or transitional housing, because a formula is expensive. And in, like, why are we assuming she's got an electric pump? Let's maybe get her a Haka, which is something you don't have to plug up, it's on the go. And we like to provide like ice packs, lunch boxes, things like that. So that's what we do. I completely agree with the mission that Dr. Kevin Fields was talking about on really just Team Kuji Chakalia. Okay, we know our principles, right? That's for us and by us to create for ourselves and to build for ourselves. So not only do I talk about that and just like empowering women to birth strongly, but I also do a lot of work with advocating on ACLU to ensure that these laws and policies are not written in ways to be cutting off our future and upcoming Black birth educators and curriculum writers at the knees. Because they're killing us and making us poverty organizations when you write things in there like we can only be certified by major white-led doula or birthing whatever organizations. So now my upcoming Black birth workers, educators that are writing their own things, you're essentially telling me that their curriculum is worthless because I can't get a job in these now colonized policies with things like that. So I love to come and voice expression when I see silliness amongst our policies, which they're trying us here in Kentucky, if you don't know. So always be referring to Granny's Girls or ACLU Kentucky page. We work very closely together to make sure that we have people that look like us. And then once we get in these places, like I'm hoping when COVID is done, we can get in these prisons and provide lactation circles. And within that, it would be a training system. So therefore, other already certified lactation consultants would be watching over us, because when it comes to the educational pathways and why we have the issues to see more Black birthing professionals, a lot of the times we have to have a certain amount of hours or clients to get certified. And we got to get certified to get in these systems to have access for our Black people to take us in there. Does that make sense? But we don't even have any mentors for us that even look like us. But luckily, our allies here are very friendly. They're ready for us. So once we have open spaces, they'll be checking off on our hours. And then we'll be building up other Black lactation specialists at the same time. So that's ultimately my goal, and my whole spin on thing is making sure that maternal education is there. I'm sorry. Do I have more time?
You do, but I want you to make sure that you talk about this important event that's coming up in early October. Don't forget about that.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Yes. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about that. We're having the annual Black Maternity Fair, and it will be at the Louisville Central Community Center. I'm hyped about it, y'all. The lineup is the realest of the realest. Forget about me. We got Anchored Blessings, who's like our best, so nice, upcoming Black IBCLC. You need to come see her. We got a Black pelvic floor specialist. I've been looking for that because I feel like a lot of what women go through, y'all, we just don't know that there's sources to make us feel better, especially in the postpartum stage. And if you don't know, most of us are dying in the postpartum stage. It's a big misconception that once we pop the baby out, oh, we survive, everything is cool. It's not. It's really not. This is the most important time. So come out here and figure out how we can make you feel good. You don't have to be laid up in the bed feeling like this. So we're going to have all that. We're going to have U of L talking about a whole bunch of different pregnancy related like complications that we see in our babies and our people. And it's going to be a full house. So just come on down. We got bomb door prizes. I like bougie stuff and I got it for you.
What's the date again?
Oh, it's Saturday, October 9th, and it's from noon to 5.
Okay, so I learned a new word from Miss Alexa yesterday, and it's swago. You are swago, girl. Swago.
Yeah.
Swago.
I hope I got that right. All right. Dr. Kishkumi Price, thank you, because thank you for also being a part of this panel, and you know how much I'm a fangirl of yours. So I want you, but I also want you, as you talk about, because we heard you kind of introduce you and your work in the last panel, I want you to make the connection between what Alexa is talking about, prenatal and postpartum healthcare, and how that is connected. And Dr. Beverly Gaines can chime in here, and Dr. Collins, how that's connected to early childhood development. What's the benefit there?
Yes, absolutely. And I was about to cede all my time to you because I can just listen to you all day. So thank you, Alexa.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, she is. So I would say one of the critical connections here is that a healthy mom is going to have a healthy child, right? And if we are not supporting the mom in her health, then we can pretty much draw a direct correlation to the fact that that child is not going to be supported in their health and their development. And when we talk about, the things that come up quite frequently when we talk about early childhood development is the brain and what is the impact on brain development, and knowing that in those first 3 years, 80% of the brain is developed. And by age 5, 90% of the brain is developed. So we're talking critical moments here for that mom and for the child in order to have that support. And it's not just, one factor. There's so many pieces that are at play here. And that's why I was so excited to hear about your initiative, Alexa, because, and I'm now putting on my mom hat, but it's difficult even when you're in a space where you want to provide nursing and you want to breastfeed your child and you're a working mom. If you don't have accommodations to support that, it is tough. It is difficult. And to have people in your corner to support you through that is huge. I mean, I remember I was the first person in my family that I knew of.
Breastfeed.
My ancestors. No. Did I freeze?
Uh-oh, I lost you.
You're good. You're good. Yeah, you're there.
Okay. I think
I think you did freeze.
Yes,
Okay.
you froze for a second.
Okay. She froze for just a second.
Sorry,
I think she's coming back.
Say, so the first person in my family that, of my living relatives that had to breastfeed and work full-time outside the home and didn't really have anybody supporting that. So it was difficult to have that connection and have somebody cheering you on and saying, you can do it. And these are ways to support that. So that's huge, So I commend you for everything that you're doing in that realm. The other piece is just knowing that when we talk about social determinants of health, there are all these avenues that if they're not addressed or we're not looking at that holistically when we're talking with families, when we're working with families, then we have these hanging strings that are, if they're not braided together, we don't braid these resources together, then we can expect for there to be these loose ends that families may just, feel depleted, feel like, have that battle fatigue because they don't know what to do or how to access the resources. So the more that we can do to provide for them is huge. And I mean, if we're setting our kids, our moms up for success, our kids up for success, that's the investment that we need to solve all these other issues. And I feel like, early childhood, talking about Black maternal health, those are issues that some people turn a very, very, very stark, contrast to what's important. So, oh yeah, I heard about that, but that's not important. So they're not seeing the whole pipeline. They're not seeing how it impacts everything. So if a child's brain isn't developed appropriately, or a mother and their child is not able to build that connection because the mother has all of that toxic stress, that gets passed to the child. And then that impacts that child's ability to be successful in the school or in the community. So if we can make those investments early on, we're seeing the difference in the outcomes just by making that simple acknowledgement of why it matters.
I want to bring in this question really quickly and post this to Dr. Gaines. This from Julie Wood. She posed this about an hour ago, and I'm glad that I think you all will be good to answer. How do we make early childhood education financially accessible to all and ensure the early childhood educators are highly qualified? So Dr. Gaines, it's not just getting your child into a daycare setting because it's safe, which was the original purpose of daycares, right? Safety and security were priorities number one, but you also want them to grow and develop.
Well, I think this is where our partners are key. We need the Blue Cross, the Humanas, the whatever Aetnas and whatever insurance company, along with the state, giving us the proper amount of support for children in daycare that meet the criteria. Now, I will say that I want our mothers, in order to have healthier babies, we have to have healthier conceptions. So as soon as you're pregnant, you need to get to one of us. You need to get to us so we can give you the best prenatal care. Now, I met Alexa through LCC, and Alexa and I have really connected because I have Black mothers who start out breastfeeding who give up because of a problem. So the whole doula experience, prenatal and postnatal, I'm on board for that. So, but I think the biggest thing is for our children, we need to get our mothers empowered. Let them know they can call Senator. You know, some people think they can't call Senator Neal, or they can't call their legislator or their Metro Council person, but you can. I think that's where the empowerment begins. Because like Mr. Hayes said, or Dr. Hayes, I'm not sure, but what he said was, by the time you get up here, you're dealing with fewer and fewer people. We want the masses. We want the masses to be empowered. And I'm telling you, I have really seen diseases with very few cases in the population get priority dollars because their parents are proactive. We just need to be proactive and express our voice. But I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
You did, Dr. Gaines.
Okay,
I appreciate it. And I
sorry.
really wish we had more time because I think we were just getting to the good, right?
Oh,
and I
I'm
think,
sorry.
no, that's okay. I thank you all for, as we say back home, putting the jam on the lower shelf. And look at the dog giving you kisses saying you did a good job there, Mom.
Well, he always does, whether I do or don't.
Well, I think he's a good judge of character and performance. Thank you, ladies. I hope you'll hang on just in case we might have an opportunity to maybe hit some other questions maybe that we didn't earlier on. I just appreciate your expertise and your time. So this is really just an exceptional program that Kevin and others have put together tonight. And I hope that you all are taking notes like I am, because a wealth of information is being shared here. I want to segue now to our parent voice panel, and Mr. Carl Brasley is going to join us now and introduce those two to be with us. And we'll give you 10, 12 minutes or so. I didn't mean to shortchange you there, sir. So excuse me for overstepping my time into yours.
You have done an awesome job, Renee. And just also want to take a really quick second just to say how awesome a panel this has been, and the great job that everyone has done. And you know, I'm going to introduce our panel, and we really have an important panel because it was mentioned earlier about, I think Dr. Gaines mentioned about the validity and the value of the parents' voices, and that's who we have here, the parents that can speak truth to some of the things they've heard, and we definitely want to hear from them. I just want to put it in context real quickly. It's just such an awesome job. Mr. Fields, Dr. Fields, I'm gonna do like Dr. Gaines, like everybody's a doctor, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Al, everyone. You know, there was so many profound
Everybody's
points.
a doctor. I agree.
There you go. There were so many profound from our keynote speaker, truly Dr. Duguay, who talked about the factors in terms of having, you know, a healthy early childhood development versus one that's not as productive or healthy. And then, you know, we heard from, you know, the leadership and, you know, conversations about the importance of policy. And I think Mr. Fields brought it home with talking about the investment and also, you know, all those, who's at the table. You know, we have to consider, and I think Senator Neal and others, you know, made the point about, you know, who's at the table. And then as we heard from, you know, our experts about, you know, the need for the parents' voices, the need for education, especially as it relates to telehealth, and then just the value and importance of the support of the mothers. And I think Dr. Kish Kumi Price made a really important point as she spoke about, you know, the need for listening. And she spoke in context of listening from corporate America and the value they can play. But also, I think Dr. Gaines brought it home talking about the value of the parents' voice. And so for our panel, we have two unique parents. They're awesome people. And I've gotten to know Melissa a bit, and Janicia is equally as talented, but we have Janicia C. From Mother to Josiah, and then we have Miss Melicia Birch as well, who's an assistant to Kevin Fields, Dr. Fields, and LCCC. And both of them are millennials, and both of them are young parents who are educated and knowledgeable. And so what we want to do, and I want to yield all the rest of the time we have to them, but what we want to hear real quickly, and you guys have heard all the great discussion, but just speak to us, and I'll start with Janicia. Speak to us about some of the challenges you see, and then some of the opportunities that you see, as well as you've heard the panel so eloquently articulate, some of the things that have gone on. So Janicia, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Raisley, and thank you to all that are on this panel. I've really enjoyed the conversation and listening, and also coming up from a position of learning. There were certainly a lot of things that I didn't know from a parent perspective as well as a professional, so very excited. One of the points that I did want to bring up that I've heard a lot of the panel speak about is, one, having access to a lot of these resources and opportunities, starting from the mothers, making sure that they get the care that they need, and then also supporting them even after birth. I think that is equally as important as I work in this field with a lot of different folks in our communities that, one, don't have access, and there are a lot of different barriers that might prevent them. I did especially enjoy the conversation about the telehealth. I feel like that is going to be an important moving forward. Also with that, there are a lot of barriers. So looking at, internet access, looking at access to technology, those are some of the things that we have to address in order to get parents in this community those resources. Thinking back when I had my son, I absolutely did not have any of those resources. I didn't know where to find them, didn't know that these options were even available. That's been about 7 years ago. And so listening to how things are, moving forward in the right direction, but definitely getting the community the knowledge and the resources that they need for this is important for mothers as well.
Melicia, I know you have, we talked the other day, and I know you have some insight, so go ahead and share with us.
I think one of the biggest challenges is just finding childcare. I think it's the most important decision that you make, to have other people care for your child, especially when, you're going back to work, you're going to school. My experience with finding childcare, particularly for my 8-year-old daughter, was difficult. She ended up attending Minorities for many years, and that having that connection got me through a bachelor's degree. It got me through being on welfare and going into the workforce. Just having those support systems around you that are judgment free, that are barrier free, and that really uplift you. And then the other thing is that a lack of connection between community resources. My daughter is ADHD, and she has social emotional development challenges. So one thing I had to learn from that was that I had to advocate for my daughter tremendously throughout her time in school, and even when she was younger. Some of the connections between the resources, it's just difficult. In part, it's probably because they're overwhelmed with so many people who are needing these great resources, that waiting lists are long. It's hard for you to get into the appointment to be evaluated, to even find what's going on. So I think those are two of the biggest challenges as it relates to early childhood education. And there's many opportunities to improve. I think we as community service providers, we need to be more cohesive in our work together, and then not be afraid, follow up on behalf of people. When you make that referral, follow up with the agency that you made that referral to make sure that the person is getting the services that they need, especially when it deals with children. So that's kind of my bit on it, and that's some of the challenges as well as some of the opportunities that I see.
I'm just going to open this real quickly, and I know we have another poll coming up, and we want to hear from everyone else. But growing up, with a humble beginning, And a lot of times though, we didn't know what was available. And I've heard it even mentioned tonight, but we know, we've heard it from Oprah and others, that like when you know better, you can do better. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any thought of how we get the message out, how do we communicate, gyms that we have like LCC and the Miniversity, who has these resources, who obviously needs additional investment to provide even more resources. How do we get the message out to the parents? I mean, they're the ones who need to know. I mean, you guys have now figured some things out and see it, but there's so many out there who don't know. Any advice that you can give with all these doctors, and people around that's notable, give them some insight in terms of how they can help get this to the parents?
I would say, for me, the most effective way that I found out about how to care for my child was directly through the child care providers that were providing service for my son. Those were the people that were on the front line, the ones that were providing, the key parts of his development. And so I think I built that trust with them. I'm talking about all, frontline workers as far as the early childhood. Also building trust with my healthcare providers was a big thing. Making sure that we have trusted providers that can provide those services to parents in the community. There can be a mistrust as we talk about, people of color into healthcare. And so there is a distrust there. And I think that can also help with bridging that gap and making folks comfortable to even come in. We're talking about maybe mothers that are maybe scared to come in for services, things like that. So even making that distrust, more better for parents. And then once you get into those spaces, to go ahead and continue to develop relationships with other key partners. So, bringing in those additional resources, bringing in, the Alexa use to kind of get you through these processes. So I think it's going to take all hands on deck to deal with some of these issues. But I think that we talked about, like Melissa said, building cohesion for some of these services and programs.
Alicia, any thoughts before I turn it over to Dr. Shaw?
And
Carl, one thing I would say is that if we can get moms, as soon as they suspect they're pregnant, not wait until they're 4 or 6 months, but as soon as they're pregnant, that's our early opportunity with these moms.
Wow, great point. Melissa, you have any thoughts?
I echo everything that Janisa says, as well as Dr. Gaines. And one other important role I think that parents play: never underestimate your story, the story that you have that you can share with other parents to help put them in a better situation. One thing that really helped me was having a friend who already had kids. She was a single mother, and just her being able to share some of the things that she went through, as well as supports, childcare, community supports, any chance that I got, I took advantage of. So whether that was me going into, Miniversity, and it was a very human experience with the directors and the childcare providers, or going into even DCBS is sometimes hard to work with. I'm not gonna lie, but even speaking to workers there and like, look, this is what's going on. Okay, what kind of resources do you got? Sometimes you got to ask for yourself, but also other parents, just hearing what other parents have successfully, been able to access the resources that work for them. And that really helped me as a parent.
That's so awesome to hear from parents. Someone said like the rubber meets the road with the parents for the children and get the children where they need. Renee, this has been an awesome experience, and I thank you, Kevin, for allowing me to be a part of it. I'm just a consultant, so I try to do like Dr. Kish said, just listen and be available. But you've done a great job of orchestrating this, and we've just had some awesome panelists, and they've brought tremendous insight. So I'm going to pause right now and put it back in your hands, and we'll go from here.
Oh, well, thank you, Dr. Brazeley. I appreciate it. Dr. Birch and Dr. C, I'm all about name it and claim it. So thanks to
I'll
all
take
the
that.
doctors. I'm sure you will. Yeah, I will too. So thank you all. It's good to get the parental voice, and Dr. Gaines spoke to that earlier about how important it is to make sure that voice is heard. And I loved what Melissa said about parents being advocates for their children, whether they have special needs and challenges that need to be addressed, finding those settings that can best address that, and high quality individual settings and experiences are important, not just this kind of one size fits all Walmart approach. Before I move on, I do want to get to this question. And Dr. Gaines, I'm going to ask you and others who are still with us if maybe you want to answer. And the question is from Mary Chellis Nelson, says, I may have missed this earlier, but how can we ensure that funding for these resources means livable wages for the teachers? And we have not talked about that. We know that that's a big area and why there's some turnover in the early childhood industry. And so is there anyone on the panel who can speak to that question, which I think is a real important one?
Okay, I'm happy to speak to that, Renee. Let me tell you this. I worked for Governor Brereton Jones. I invited African Americans on every panel I hosted, but they didn't all show up. And so I wondered, what is the difference? And forgive me if I go into a scientific model, but Skinner had mice. And Skinner's mice said, if you press the pellet and food comes down, they go eat it over and over again. But I think what happens in our case is maybe we don't even press the pellet. I don't know, but nothing comes down. So my position is this. African Americans, whom I love more than I love my life itself, is that we have to get assembled. We have to understand the system, and we have to understand how we can change the system. We need Dr. Hayes, we need Dr. Raul, we need Dr. Fields, all those. But you know what? The groundswell is what really changes people. So we need moms. We need moms to say, hey, I just missed my period. Okay, get you in a program, because that's going to have, oh, my dogs are now, I should have not, okay. That should stimulate them into a path of, okay, now we're in a pathway of control. But our people don't do it. And I've worked with Senator Neal, God bless his soul. He worked with me when I worked with the governor. But I'd have Black people on my panels, but they wouldn't show up. We have to show up. We have to teach the moms. Yes, we need corporate support. We need state support. We need federal support. But you know what? We need groundswell.
Oops, good point. Thank you, Dr. Gaines. Dr. Fields, I don't know if you wanted to jump in here, and I'll give you an opportunity to do so in just a moment, but we do want to go now to poll number 3 to measure satisfaction level and whether you would recommend to friends, family, colleagues. So let's bring that question up. So the overall satisfaction with this webinar, we hope that every single one of you has not a hesitation in answering extremely satisfied, and you see the other options that you don't want to necessarily choose right below it. Number 2, would you recommend this webinar to family, friends, or colleagues? Extremely likely is what we hope that you will click without hesitation. And then recommended next steps. Please share your recommendations for next steps in the webinar chat. And we really thank you for that. So we'll let you answer those. And while we're letting you respond to those questions, I do want to go to Mr. Fields, Dr. Fields, as we're all lovingly calling each other tonight, and see if you have any follow-up to that question about securing high quality early learning educators, many of whom are women and mothers themselves? And how do you see the needle moving and really adequate compensation for those who are really rendering sacrificial service to other people's children?
Absolutely, Renee. And first, let me say it is indeed a challenge to attract and retain quality early child development specialists because of the inadequacy in organizations like us to pay a livable wage. However, help is on the way, we believe, based on recent announcements. There is policy being developed in Frankfurt based on the availability of funding through the American Rescue Plan to address this issue head on. And so as we execute and we pass that policy and we execute on implementation of that, child care providers will be empowered to pay more because we will be able to receive additional funding. Our goal has always been to get to a place where we could pay a livable wage. At LCCC through the Minorities program. It has been a challenge, but we believe the help is on the way. We're committed to that. We just need the ability to do that and stay solvent as a business. So as long as we can get that legislation in place, we should see some change happening soon on that. As early as this November is the prognosis. So help is on the way.
And Mr. Fields, some may question, that's one-time money. So when that runs out, will you be able to sustain whatever economic decisions you've been able to make and a more empowering wages that you're being able to give? Is that a sustainable method beyond what can be coming from the federal government?
Well, we do believe that it is a primer. This American Rescue Plan will prime what can happen into the future. It is a 3-year commitment. So there will be a runway of opportunity to continue that for at least 3 years. We do know that at the federal level, as well as at the local government level, that we have a lot of our aspiring and current politicians talking about universal health care. Universal child care. Mm-hmm. And if we get a passage of universal child care, if we could just imagine that, we've decided, I don't know how long ago in our history, to finance public education, K-12, such that it is free. And understand that that is in of itself a service to families that need to go to work, because during the academic year, you've got a place to send your child to be taken care of for 6 hours out of the day at no cost out of your pocket. So we hope that universal child care can be another sustainable model in the future that will finance early child development, especially in underserved communities, so that we can have a place where parents can take children to receive quality child care at no cost. So that's the dream, but we can get there if we vote, we can get there if we lead and advocate, and that's what, that's the pillar that we stand on.
If Senator Neal is still with us, I wanted to ask him, and the Q&A function is still open, and we have just a few minutes before we're going to adjourn, but I wanted to ask him about efforts to sustain full-day kindergarten funding and what he sees from his perch in the legislature about a temperature to invest in full-day kindergarten and earlier childhood initiatives.
Just let me say, Renee, on behalf of Senator Neal, he did ask my permission to be excused because he had some other pressing business. Sure. I will relay that question to him, okay, and we will make sure that he does respond to that. I know he stands in our corner, and yes, everything that we're advocating, he's behind. So, but he had to excuse himself.
Sure, understood. Well, he's a very, very busy man, and we appreciate him taking the time that he did this evening. Just some real quick takeaways, and then I will let Mr. Fields kind of close us out and issue the benediction as though it were. I think it was so appropriate for Dr. Jacqueline Duguay to kind of talk to us about the adverse childhood experiences, how what happens at home and what happens in our environments and our communities can really affect the resiliency of children and indeed their futures and their physical health, because we know that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, over time can even shorten the lifespan of someone who has unaddressed ACEs. And we know that that parental involvement, that protective relationships, trusted adults can buffer the impacts of toxic stress and ACEs. And we know that the benefits of a high quality early learning experience can lead to improved education, higher wages and earnings, and improved health outcomes, when those who were looking at the bottom line should be driven by those motives, because all of that equals a better, thriving, higher tax paying society. So the benefits of investing in early childhood certainly outweigh the reasons not to invest in it. When we look at leadership, how to address urban inner city populations to get those full spectrum of services for family, beginning at prenatal on. How can we get the intentionality out of corporations and modeling best practices, addressing the economic power structures through policy and regulated through corporate leadership, that having one voice of color at the table is not enough, that you need to have more, and they need to not be just in the boardroom, but in the community. Organizations need to represent the people that they serve out in the community. Dr. Beverly Gaines making the point relentlessly about the need for parental involvement in early childhood before, at conception, as soon as that mother thinks that she may be with child, getting her to some services so that she can be a healthy mom who will deliver a healthy baby. Not to overlook the parents and all the conversation about the stakeholders, whether they're policy or their boardrooms and corporate areas, not to forget the parents. We love to have the telehealth conversation. 154% growth in telehealth services is since the pandemic, and millennials aged 25 to 40 are really making use of that. And we know that if we can deploy that at a greater amount, ease some of those technological barriers, that we will have better outcomes and improve early childhood experiences for more people. And parents being an advocate for their children and their settings, and community service providers needing to have more cohesion and following up with people who need assistance. Those are just few of the takeaways that we have tonight. And I think if there's one action plan, is we all need to keep engaged in this issue and follow it, press our lawmakers and policymakers, write those letters to your senator, your state rep, even those who are not serving you directly, and to the leadership in those chambers, all the way up the chain, because that will indeed help make the difference. We do have an anonymous attendee as we close out who asked, are there any thoughts on relational poverty or how to address it? And Kevin, I'll let you answer that if you'd like, please, sir.
Yeah, relational poverty. I'm not so familiar with that syntax or that term, but we're very familiar with the issue of poverty. And so we believe that in community settings like the one that we serve, that poverty certainly needs to be confronted by transforming and or eliminating conditions that tend to preserve poverty. And so, we're going to work together. It's core to our mission of advancing equity. And when we talk about equity in Louisville Central Community Centers, we're talking about economics, and we're talking about transforming the economic conditions in our community. So I may not be on point with that particular question, because again, I'm not very clear on that terminology, but I would like to talk offline with that individual just to get more clarification on it, and maybe then can give a better response to that.
Yes, and when you find out, I'd love to know what that term relational poverty is. I will Google that myself at the conclusion of this program. Before I turn it over to Mr. Dr. Fields, I just want to say what a pleasure it's been for me to host, moderate, MC this event tonight. I've learned so much. I've taken so many copious notes, and it helps in us as a statewide agency that serves every corner of this state and 7 contiguous areas around us to understand this issue of early childhood, where the gaps are, where the needs are, and how we can help bridge those gaps. So in my closing remarks, I want to acknowledge the sponsors again, PNC, Grow Up Great, and the supporting sponsors, Metro United Way, Brown Forman, WHAS, Crusade for Children, and COSAIR Charities. And so once again, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Kevin Fields, and I hope that I get a chance to do this with you again real soon. Blessings to you.
I hope so as well, Renee. And just let me just thank you thank you, Renee Shaw, for doing a phenomenal job of hosting this program. This is one for the ages in terms of our organizational accomplishments. So thank you so much, Renee. It's great to be a partner with you. I know that you do this work across the state with Kentucky Education Television, but for you sharing with us tonight in a volunteer capacity, the way that you did, certainly brought it home. So thank you, Renee. I just want to add a few more acknowledgements. Certainly want to thank everyone who made this event possible. This Advancing Equity Through Early Child Development Town Hall was an idea that we wanted to put together to convene Black leadership to address these important issues of early child development. And I think we accomplished that goal. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of it. Certainly, I want to thank and acknowledge the Louisville branch NAACP, President Ralph Cunningham, for agreeing to partner with us. I chair Ralph's Economic Development Committee, and at the core of this discussion is a conversation about economics. And so we're advancing the NAACP's mission through this work, as well as Louisville Central Community Center. I certainly want to give thanks to my board, represented by Dr. Anna Smith tonight. Thank you so much for your awesome leadership. Certainly kudos to our new friend that we've met through this process, Dr. Jacqueline Duguay, for an awesome keynote address. Dr. Duguay, we'll be in contact with you following this event, just to make sure we continue to partner and collaborate. I want to thank all of the participants, all of our moderators. Thank you, Al Cornish. Thank you for your leadership tonight. Thank you for your leadership across the state with the Pritchard Committee. I'm pleased to join the ranks of the Pritchard Committee to work alongside you and other leaders to address academic excellence in our state and certainly in our community. Thank you, Carl Braisley, for an awesome job of moderating that parent panel as well. Thank you to all the panelists. Senator Gerald Neal, we know, is equipped to lead the way with policy development on our behalf, and he's well-versed, having participated in this. We want to thank him. Thank you, Dr. Kishkumi Price, and thank you for your wisdom, your leadership. We know you're on the front line addressing these issues in your role at Kentucky Youth Advocates. Thank you so much. Thank you, Harry Hayes, for being an awesome partner to us as a corporate leader. And we believe that Anthem is a great corporate citizen that will do right by us in this space of healthcare for early child development. And we look forward to collaborating with you. You know, we're to our expert panel, great conversation. Dr. Beverly Gaines, who is anchoring our work as we reimagine our Miniversity, and we bring early child development alongside early medicine. And then, you know, we just have been blessed to meet through this process Alexa Hughes, who is a great partner to us already. Really excited about her leadership. Connecting to the internet. I gotta remember not to say her name next to this electronic device.
Wait 10 seconds.
Yeah. So, but Ms. Hughes, thank you so much for your leadership. And certainly Dr. Cynthia Collins, who I've known literally all of my life. And I'm proud to say that she's my first cousin. And we've been together since we were infants. And she is a brilliant leader in medicine, family practice medicine, as well as telehealth medicine, which is, as she said, the way forward in healthcare. So I just want to thank everybody, just to say ditto again to our presenting sponsors. Thank you, PNC Grow Up Great, for being our presenting sponsor tonight, and to all the other corporate and community sponsors that are collaborating with us in early child development. We've been a longtime partner of Metro United Way. We appreciate the leadership of Metro United Way. We certainly want to say thank you to Brown-Forman for believing in our ability to reimagine the Miniversity, and certainly to WHAS, Crusade for Children as well. So thank you to everybody who made this possible. And certainly last but not least, I want to say thank you to my team at Louisville Central Community Center, my staff. I really want to say kudos to you guys. Melissa Birch, who just a few months ago brought a new family member into this world and hit the ground running to bring this, help to organize this event. Thank you, Melissa, for doing an outstanding job as you always do, alongside Janicia C., who oversees our adult program and our special populations programs. Thank you both to the staff who not only served as parent panelists, but also were working behind the scenes to produce this town hall. So with that, I just want to say thank you, everybody. Please stay tuned to this work. We've only just begun this idea of transforming a model of early child development for the future. And with that, be blessed and stay tuned. Thank you so much to everybody who attended this event and for your comments and for your questions. And please stay engaged with us at Louisville Central Community Center. Good night.
Good night.